They poured concrete over my crops at 5:30 in the morning. No warning, no permission. Just 5 trucks, a clipboard queen, and the death of my family's legacy unfolding before my eyes. What would you do if the land your grandfather spent his entire life building, the land your daughter's college tuition depends on, was being stolen legally by the people who live next door? Would you scream? Would you fight? Or would you do what I did and buy back your power one house at a time? In this video, I'm going to tell you the true story of how an HOA tried to erase 3 generations of family farming in one morning. The lies they told, the maps they faked, and the neighbors who turned their backs. And the exact moment they realized they picked the wrong man to bully. Because what they didn't know was that before I became a farmer, I spent 15 years as a real estate attorney, and I still remember every inch of land my family has ever owned. This isn't just a story about tomatoes or tractors. It's about power, and what happens when you finally take it back. Let me take you back to the moment it all began, when the sound of diesel engines shattered my sleep, and the first drop of concrete hit the earth my father once tilled with his bare hands. Patricia Winters didn't move into Maplewood Estates. She marched in like she owned the place. She arrived 8 months before the concrete trucks did, driving a brand new black Escalade with a county commissioner's wife parking tag swinging from the rearview mirror. Her house, the biggest one on the block, 3 stories, imported tile roof, Tuscan luxury in the heart of America, she called it, in the community newsletter, which she wrote herself. And within 2 weeks, she was HOA president. Unopposed. Of course she was. Most people didn't even realize she'd volunteered. They missed the fine print in the email or couldn't attend the vote. That's how these people work, quiet when it benefits them, loud when they need control. But I'll admit she played the part well at first. Patricia threw summer socials with wine tastings and raffle baskets. She gave out HOA-branded tote bags and welcome muffins to new families. To some, she seemed like a gift. But to me, she was a developer in disguise. It started with little things. A letter to Mrs. Patel about her culturally inappropriate garden gnome. A warning to the Jackson kids for unauthorized sidewalk chalk art. Then came the real moves. Patricia proposed a beautification project for Maplewood. New lighting, pool upgrades, a community clubhouse. It all sounded nice until people read the fine print. A-doo-doo were about to double. Anyone who couldn't keep up would face liens and legal pressure. She claimed the vote passed by majority. But no one I knew had even seen a ballot. Then the fines started coming in. Bill Jackson, $150.00 for wind chimes. Emma Douglas, $300.00 for a garden trellis exceeding height limits. Mr. Weller, $500.00 for a compost bin visible from the street. Patricia didn't need a gavel. She had bylaws, and she wielded them like a sword. But her endgame wasn't rules. It was real estate. See, every HOA violation that stuck became a lien. And a lien meant financial pressure. And financial pressure in a neighborhood already reeling from inflation meant distressed sales. She and her husband, who just happened to be a developer, started making offers. Quiet, private. Just high enough to look generous. Just low enough to feel predatory. By the time I noticed, 4 homes on my street had already changed hands. And then she turned her eyes toward me. My farm. My family's legacy. Not because it was ugly or outdated, but because it was in her way. What started as HOA citations soon became a full-blown assault. Letters accusing me of improper fencing. Threats of legal action over livestock noise. And finally, the unthinkable, pouring concrete over my heirloom tomato field. All of it wrapped in HOA-approved language. All of it legal on the surface. But underneath, it was theft. Slow, strategic, ruthless. Looking back, Patricia didn't build a community. She built an empire, one violation at a time. And like every empire built on fear, she thought it would last forever. She thought I was just a farmer, just another tired man with dirty boots and no allies. But what she didn't know, what she never bothered to ask, was that before I inherited this farm, I spent 15 years fighting land fraud from behind a desk in the city. She came with a clipboard and a concrete mixer. I came with blueprints, court records, and a stubborn streak a mile wide. And as I stood in my kitchen that night, staring at the concrete slab where my tomatoes should have grown, I whispered one promise to myself. You picked the wrong land to steal, because this wasn't just about a quarter acre. It was about stopping a predator with a parking pass. And the first battle was buried somewhere in the dusty filing cabinets of the county courthouse. I used to think land couldn't lie, that property lines were sacred, etched into history, protected by law and safe from greedy hands. But standing in front of a concrete slab where my tomatoes once grew, I learned the truth. It's not the land that lies, it's the paper. After the police told me it's a civil matter, I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the attic. My grandfather's old wooden chest sat beneath a dusty tarp, smelling like oil, cedar, and memories. Inside were maps, faded, yellowed, edges curled, each one hand-labeled in my grandfather's precise handwriting. He'd kept everything, because he knew. Back in 1973, the county tried to seize part of this farm for a highway off-ramp. He fought them, and won. The judge's ruling was clear. The northeast quarter area in question belongs to the Wilson property in perpetuity. It was printed in the Daily County Register, dated April 4, 1974, and I had the clipping in my hands. The next morning I drove to the county records office. Fluorescent lights buzzed. The walls were lined with metal cabinets, labels half peeled, drawers stuffed with time. A woman named Barbara sat behind the counter, tired eyes but kind smile. I'm looking for property boundary documents, Maplewood Estates versus Wilson Farm, anything recent. She raised an eyebrow. That dispute again. Again. She walked me to the back and unlocked the archives. 3 days. That's how long I spent there, digging through decades of red tape. On the third day, Barbara leaned over my shoulder and whispered, "Look at this." It was a scanned copy of the survey Patricia submitted with her permit application. I stared at it and my heart dropped. The northeast boundary line had shifted by exactly 3.1 feet. Just enough to justify a shared use zone. Just enough to pave over my crops. And the kicker? The map she submitted was dated 1973, before my grandfather had the boundaries corrected in court. Barbara whispered, "That's the version they used for the permit, not the amended one from '74. Let me put it plainly. Patricia knew. She or someone working with her dug up an outdated version of the property map and used it to steal my land. And the county? Too understaffed, too overwhelmed, too trusting. They approved it. On paper, it all looked clean. But it wasn't. It was legal manipulation, death by fine print. I called Sam Harrington that night. An old friend, brilliant property rights attorney. His voice sharpened as I told him everything. If they submitted outdated maps while being aware of the corrected versions, he said, that's not just shady, that's fraud. He asked me to scan everything. The 1973 and 1974 maps. The judge's ruling. The newspaper clipping. And the HOA newsletter announcing the new parking lot. 24 hours later he called back. You have a case, Tom. But you need to be ready for war. Because people like Patricia, they don't back down when they're cornered. They double down. That night I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by maps, coffee, and fire. Literal fire burning inside me. I realized something Patricia never expected. I could match her paperwork for paperwork. Bylaw for bylaw. Move for move. I wasn't just defending my farm. I was exposing a system built to intimidate and silence. And these maps, were the first crack in her empire. Lesson: never assume a document speaks the truth. Ask who submitted it and what they had to gain. Because land theft in this country doesn't always come with bulldozers. Sometimes it comes with a clipboard, a smile, and a line drawn just a few feet too far. The next step? Stop the machines. Freeze construction. Protect what was left of my farm. And to do that, I needed to file an emergency injunction before Patricia made her next move. They didn't need bulldozers anymore. They had paper. After I discovered the falsified maps and started asking questions, the attacks didn't stop. They changed. It began with a letter, folded neatly, delivered by hand. $250.00 fine for improper agricultural equipment. The photo attached showed my wheelbarrow leaning against the greenhouse. The next day, $500.00 for unauthorized livestock noise. The chickens, at sunrise, like they'd done for 20 years. By the end of the week, I'd racked up nearly $3,000.00 in violations. Every envelope felt like a jab. Not enough to knock me over, but enough to make me bleed. At first I laughed. I'd seen this tactic before, back when I was a lawyer fighting big developers. Death by paperwork. They overwhelm you, not to win on merit but to wear you down. But this was different, because this wasn't coming from some faceless corporation. It was coming from my neighbors, the people I'd sold eggs to, the families who'd picked strawberries in my field, the same ones who waved at me every morning for a decade. They started crossing the street to avoid me. Some turned their backs entirely. And I don't just mean metaphorically. Emma Douglas, who used to bring pies every spring, literally turned away at the mailbox one morning like I was carrying the plague. The worst part? The looks. Like I was the problem. Like my crops were some kind of disease. One neighbor whispered to another as I passed, "If he just sold, we could get our clubhouse upgrade." Another said loud enough for me to hear, "This isn't a farm town anymore." And just like that, the community I'd loved, protected, grown food for, treated me like an intruder. That's the power of HOA psychology. They don't just fine you. They isolate you. They turn whispers into fences, and fences into walls. It's not just about control, it's about breaking your spirit. One violation, one cold shoulder at a time. And Patricia? And she was masterful at it. She hosted weekly wine nights with her inner circle, told stories about the farmer who refused to adapt. She claimed I was driving down home values, showed them manipulated market data, said I was unstable, aggressive, and financially irresponsible. It worked. Even people I thought were allies went silent. Fear is contagious, so is comfort, and Patricia offered both if you stayed on her side. But fear goes both ways, because one person didn't stay silent. Frank Reynolds, the HOA treasurer, a soft-spoken man with nervous hands and a guilty conscience. He approached me after a particularly tense meeting. "I shouldn't be telling you this," he whispered, "but Patricia's been using the emergency HOA fund to pay lawyers. And she's funneling cash into a second account under her husband's company." I stared at him, stunned. "Well," he glanced around, voice shaking, "because they're trying to bankrupt you? You desperate enough to sell? That parking lot was never the goal. They want the whole farm." And in that moment it clicked. The fines, the lies, the silence. They weren't trying to scare me. They were trying to starve me. Financially, emotionally, socially, force me into a corner, until I had nowhere left to go but out. Lesson: the scariest kind of warfare isn't loud. It's quiet. And it's legal. Until someone stands up. I wasn't just fighting Patricia anymore. I was fighting a machine. Fueled by fear. Built on bylaws. And backed by people too tired or too scared to resist. So I made a decision. If I couldn't count on the community, I'd buy it, one house at a time. Because if they wanted to use the rules to take my land, I'd use their rules to take back control. You can't fight fire with kindness. But sometimes, you can fight HOA tyranny with real estate law. And if there's one thing Patricia never expected from a simple farmer, it was a counterattack written in ink and filed at the county clerk's office. That night, after Frank warned me about the financial plot to crush my farm, I stayed up till 3 a.m. Not planting, not arguing online, researching property records. I wanted to know exactly how much power Patricia really had. Turns out in our HOA bylaws, every property owner has one vote. Every vote controls board decisions on budget, enforcement, elections, even land use. Majority rules. And 51%. That's everything. Most people don't know this. They assume HOA boards are untouchable. But in reality, if you own the homes, you own the vote. And Patricia, in all her arrogance, had overlooked something vital. Her own greed had driven people out. In the last 8 months, at least 9 families had sold their homes, pushed out by rising dues, legal threats, and endless fines. 4 of those properties were still listed for sale. 2 were already in foreclosure. I made a call to Sam, my lawyer. Can I buy them? Anonymously. He laughed. Absolutely, through an LLC, and I know just how to structure it. We moved fast. I formed Wilson Land and Community LLC, a name Patricia wouldn't recognize. Then, using savings and a chunk of inheritance I'd planned to use on orchard expansion, I made fair offers to each seller, above foreclosure value but below market. I didn't negotiate, I didn't delay, because every hour mattered. Every house I acquired brought me one step closer to controlling the board. And I wasn't just buying houses. I was buying votes. Within 2 weeks, I owned 4 properties. Each one came with its own mailbox, yard, and HOA voting power. I kept the former owners as renters, charging modest rent, giving them security they hadn't felt in months. Word started spreading. More sellers reached out, some desperate, some just done. By the end of week 3, 11 properties, 11 votes. Out of 20. Patricia still thought she ruled. But the scales had tipped. And I was done waiting. Meanwhile, Patricia ramped up her attacks. Inspectors showed up on my farm daily. That tractor is too loud. Your barn is violating height limits. Your scarecrow is a visual disturbance. One afternoon, I caught her walking along my fence line with a man in a tailored suit. He had slicked back hair, designer shoes, and a folder under his arm. I recognized him from the local paper. CEO of Cornerstone Enterprises. The developer. I got close enough to overhear. Once he's out, we can break ground by fall, the man said. Anchor store's already committed. Patricia replied, cool as ice. I've got a board vote scheduled next week. We'll declare his barn a safety hazard, then order demolition. That night, I sat in the dark of my kitchen and stared at the barn window. I thought of my grandfather building it by hand, of the nights I'd spent storing harvest there, of my daughter's first drawing, still pinned to the inside beam. And I thought, they really don't think I'll fight? So I called Sam again. I'm ready, I said. Let's write the motion. Let's take the board back. Lesson? They used votes to steal. I used votes to stop them. It wasn't revenge. It was redemption, one property deed at a time. Because when the rules are rigged, you don't just play the game. You change the board? The next HOA meeting was in 5 days. And Patricia had no idea. She was about to walk into her own political funeral. The meeting was scheduled for 6:00 p.m. By 5:45, the community center parking lot was full. Fees, pickup trucks, minivans, even a few bicycles. Some people came out of curiosity. Some came out of fear. But most came because they had finally had enough. Inside, the air was tense. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in months sat side by side. Eyes flicked between Patricia's polished heels and the folder I held in my hand. Patricia took her spot at the podium like it was a throne. Blue blazer, hair in a tight bun, laser pointer ready. As you can see, she began, clicking through a slideshow of carefully framed photos of my farm. This agricultural property continues to harm our neighborhood's image and value. The board has determined the old barn is a safety hazard. We're voting tonight on immediate demolition. She smiled. Confident, practiced, prepared. And that's when I stood up. Point of order, I said calmly. Before we vote, there's been a change in board composition. The room shifted. A murmur, a rustle of papers. Patricia blinked. Excuse me? Sam walked in right on cue, briefcase in hand, court official at his side. Mr. Wilson's LLC now holds controlling interest in 11 properties in this community, Sam said loudly. That gives him 51% of the voting rights. Under your own bylaws, Section 7, Paragraph 2, he is entitled to call this meeting to order. Patricia's face turned a shade I can only describe as lawsuit pink. That's impossible, she snapped. Sam handed her the signed documents. It's all been verified, county clerk, notary, escrow. Then came the real blow. Furthermore, Sam continued, we're submitting evidence of financial mismanagement, fraudulent permitting based on outdated property maps, and undisclosed financial ties to Cornerstone Enterprise. The court official placed a large envelope on the board table. The silence was deafening. Frank Reynolds, the HOA treasurer, stood up slowly. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. It's true, he said quietly. She used HOA emergency funds to pay private attorneys and funneled money into her husband's development firm. Someone in the back gasped. Emma Douglas stood, her voice shaking. That's why the pool's still broken. We've been paying dues for years and nothing's been fixed. Bill Jackson, who once got fined $500.00 for roses, spoke up next. She threatened to sue me when I asked questions. One by one, the silence cracked, and the truth poured in, like a dam breaking. Patricia, still clutching the podium, lost her composure. You think this changes anything? She hissed. My husband is on the zoning board. My brother works at the bank that holds your mortgages. You think you've won? You're nothing but a farmer. She pointed at me like I was dirt. But I didn't flinch. I stepped forward, held up a single sheet of paper. The court file injunction and a forensic audit summary. You tried to bury me in fines and concrete, I said. But you forgot one thing, Patricia. I know the law, and I never back down. 2 security guards Sam had hired stepped closer. Patricia screamed about conspiracies as they escorted her out. Lesson: power built on fear is fragile. All it takes is one person with the truth and the courage to speak it. That night, the board voted to remove Patricia permanently. I was elected interim HOA president. But I didn't celebrate, because this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of cleaning up the wreckage she left behind. The next morning, I woke to something I hadn't heard in months. Silencer. No threats. No tracks. No inspectors at my gate. But when I walked out to check my barn, spray-painted in blood-red letters across the door were the words, "This isn't over." The red spray paint on my barn door had barely dried when neighbors began to show up. At first, it was just Eleanor Thompson from across the street, still in her gardening gloves, holding a thermos of coffee and a nervous smile. I saw what they wrote, she said, looking at the vandalism. This neighborhood owes you more than silence. We want to help. Before I could answer, a pickup pulled into the driveway. Then another. Then a minivan with kids hanging out the side windows, clutching garden trowels like they were lightsabers. By noon, over 50 people stood in front of my ruined quarter-acre. The same quarter-acre that had once been heirloom tomatoes, then concrete, and now just scarred ground. I stepped forward, cleared my throat. This land was taken from us by fear. It's only right we take it back with purpose. Someone shouted, "Let's tear it up!" And just like that, the work began. Sledgehammers slammed into concrete. Pickaxes chipped away at the edges. Kids stomped the cracks like superheroes saving the earth. The air filled with the smell of sweat, dust, and something else I hadn't felt in a long time. How? Emma brought sandwiches. Tom from Lot 6 brought lemonade. Even Mr. Grumpy from 2 streets over handed me a shovel without saying a word. We worked until sunset. When the final slab broke, a cheer erupted, loud enough to shake the very fences that once divided us. But the work was far from done. The soil underneath was compacted and choked. Concrete doesn't just sit on top of the earth, it suffocates it. I called in a friend from the university, soil scientist. She ran tests and came back with a frown. This ground's been chemically leached and heat-cooked. You'll need months to rebuild the topsoil, compost, mulch, oxygenation, the works. I looked at the scorched earth, and then at the faces around me. They weren't discouraged. "We've got time," Elaine said, "and we've got each other." Over the next few weeks, magic happened. Neighbors dropped off compost bins. A retired chemistry teacher built a DIY irrigation system. Someone even donated a greenhouse frame from an old-school garden project. The HOA newsletter, once a list of fines and threats, was now filled with garden progress photos, tomato tips, and seed exchange Sundays. We named it the Green Corner, and we agreed. Every family in Maplewood could claim a bed, plant what they wanted, grow what they needed. For the first time, people who had once avoided each other now shared watering schedules. Teenagers who once rolled their eyes at meetings now posted Instagram stories of their first cucumbers. And Frank, the once silent treasurer, planted strawberries in honor of his late wife. He cried when they bloomed. Lesson: you can't erase history with concrete, but you can reclaim it. With your hands, your heart, and a whole lot of dirt under your nails. This wasn't just about tomatoes anymore. It was about healing. Not just land, but trust. Not just plants, but people. One afternoon I sat under the old oak near the fence line, watching the kids laugh while watering carrots. A woman I didn't recognize approached me. Blue jacket, clipboard, determined stride. For a moment my heart tightened. "I'm from Fairview Heights," she said. "Our HOA just voted to demolish our community garden. We heard about yours. Can you show us how you fought back?" And right then I knew. This story wasn't over. It was just beginning to spread, just when I thought the storm had passed. It came roaring back. Only this time it wasn't cement trucks or clipboard fines. It was a lawsuit. A certified envelope arrived one morning, tucked neatly between seed catalogs and utility bills. The return address read, "Winters and Brooks, Attorneys at Law." Inside was a thick stack of legal documents. Patricia was suing me for emotional distress, character defamation, and, get this, orchestrating an illegal hostile takeover of a properly established homeowners association. She was demanding $2 million in damages. $2 million. Sam, my attorney, read through it once, then again, slower. "This isn't a legal case," he muttered. "It's a PR stunt in a courtroom." But that didn't stop my hands from shaking. I'd done everything by the book. Filed proper deeds, collected evidence, followed bylaws. But people like Patricia, they don't need to win. They just need to make it expensive. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the barn made me flinch. Every passing car made me wonder. Was she watching? Was she planning something worse? At 2:13 a.m. I got a text from an unknown number. "Give up the farm or things get ugly." I showed Sam. He raised an eyebrow. "Classic intimidation tactic. We'll log it, but you should beef up your security." The next morning I installed cameras around the perimeter and hired a night guard from a local agency. It wasn't cheap, but peace of mind, worth every penny. And then it got uglier. Someone spray-painted "This isn't over" across my barn again, this time in red and black, underlining each word twice. One of the newly planted apple trees was uprooted overnight. Not broken. Uprooted. Deliberate, calculated, personal. Officer Martinez came out, took photos, and shook his head. "We're adding it to the ongoing harassment file," he said, "but unless we catch someone in the act." I knew what that meant. I was on my own. Meanwhile, Patricia wasn't done with the theatrics. She started holding her own unofficial HOA meetings at her house, with wine and whisper campaigns. Rumors flew. He's trying to turn our neighborhood into a working farm. He's going to invite low-income housing projects, and only bought those houses to flip them to corporation. And the scariest one? He's suing you next. Even people who had stood by me began pulling back. I saw it in their eyes, uncertainty creeping in again. Because bullies like Patricia don't need truth to win. They just need fear. That's when I realized something crucial. Lesson: the second a bully loses power, they don't disappear. They double down. They bluff. They lie louder and hope someone's still listening. But this time I wasn't the only one standing, because something else had changed since the last attack. People had seen what truth looked like. They'd touched it with their own hands, shoveling soil, planting seeds, rebuilding trust. And Patricia? She didn't scare as easily anymore. Eleanor called one night. Her voice was steady. "We know what she's trying to do, but we're not backing down." Then Bill Jackson added compost to the garden with a handwritten note. "Concrete didn't break us. Neither will lawsuits." Even Mr. Gonzalez, who'd barely spoken in years, showed up with tomato seedlings from his father's farm in Mexico. I looked around at what we'd built, what we were still building, and I knew something Patricia would never understand. You can sue a person, but you can't sue a community. The court date was set, and I would be there, not just with a legal team, but with an army of neighbors who finally found their voices. Because this wasn't about winning anymore. This was about finishing what she started. The courtroom smelled like old carpet and sharpened pencils. I sat at the plaintiff's table in my only suit, flanked by Sam and 2 boxes of evidence. Patricia arrived in a fitted white dress suit and heels that clicked louder than her lawyer's objections. 2 attorneys, 6 color-coded binders, and a facial expression that screamed media victim. She looked at me like I was trespassing on her turf. I smiled politely, because that day, I wasn't just defending a farm. I was defending everything it stood for. The judge, a silver-haired man with a stern brow and zero patience for theatrics, asked for opening statement. Patricia's lawyer stood and launched into a dramatic tale. My client, a community leader, was harassed, undermined, and ousted from her rightful position in a hostile land grab led by a disgruntled farmer with a personal vendetta. Sam let him finish, then stood slowly. "Your Honor, we will present indisputable evidence of fraud, embezzlement, property misrepresentation, and an orchestrated campaign to intimidate residents for profit. The only hostile act here was pouring concrete on land she didn't own." We brought out the maps. The 1973 version Patricia submitted, and the corrected 1974 version with the judge's ruling. The same ruling her permit overlooked. Next came the bank records. HOA funds transferred into a private account tied to her husband's company. Check after check labeled consulting fees for Cornerstone Enterprises. Then the recording. Her and the developer planning to get me out so they could break ground before fall. The courtroom fell silent. Even the judge leaned forward. Patricia's lawyers tried everything, blaming clerical errors, misunderstandings, even me. "Mr. Wilson is turning this community into a farm town." The judge raised an eyebrow. It already was. Then came the verdict. This court finds substantial evidence of fraud, financial misconduct, and intentional misrepresentation of property boundaries. All charges against Mr. Wilson are dismissed. Mrs. Winters will surrender her passport pending criminal investigation. She didn't look at me as she left. But the moment the courtroom doors closed, someone behind me whispered, "Just," and that's when it hit me. Not the ruling, not the victory, but what we'd done, together. Over the next few weeks, the headlines told the story. HOA, president charged with fraud in land grab scandal. Local farmer reclaims land, rebuilds community. People started knocking on my door, not reporters, but neighbors. Mrs. Jenkins, the woman who once cheered Patricia's fines, showed up with peach cobbler and tears in her eyes. I believed her lies. I'm so sorry. Even Mr. Williams, the man who wouldn't look me in the eye last spring, offered to help build a new greenhouse. You turned this place around, son. That little patch of land, once concrete, now carrots and cucumbers, had become more than a garden. It became proof that the little guy could fight back, that truth mattered, that community could heal if someone was brave enough to plant the first seed. Lesson: you don't need to own a city to make change. You just need one piece of land, one reason to fight, and one moment where you refuse to back down. My farm didn't just survive, it inspired. One sunny afternoon, a young couple pulled into my driveway. The woman held a notebook, the man had a phone with a video app open. "We're from 3 towns over," she said. "Our HOA is trying to demolish our community center. We heard what you did here. Could you teach us how to fight back?" I looked out over the fields, the barn, the rows of lettuce, the neighbors laughing in the garden. And I smiled. "We can do better than that. We can show you how to rebuild." The morning of the harvest festival, the air smelled like tomatoes and cinnamon. Kids ran between garden rows, giggling as they chased butterflies. Eleanor was setting up folding tables covered in pies and roasted vegetables. Frank stood by the grill, flipping corn like a seasoned chef. It had been exactly 1 year since the concrete trucks rolled in unannounced. Since Patricia Winters tried to erase my family's legacy in the name of progress. And now, that very same patch of land was feeding an entire neighborhood. We didn't just rebuild a garden. We rebuilt something far deeper, something we didn't even realize we'd lost. Community. Not the kind that exists on a mailing list or a HOA app. The kind where neighbors check in on each other. Where kids borrow sugar without texting first. Where strangers become allies because one person was brave enough to say, "This isn't right." The festival opened with a speech. I didn't want to give it. But Eleanor insisted, handing me a microphone and pushing me onto the makeshift stage between the compost bin and a scarecrow wearing sunglasses. I looked out at the crowd. People who had once looked through me, now smiling, waving, listening. So I told them the truth. When they poured concrete on my farm, I thought I'd lost everything. My land, my income, my dignity. But what hurt the most was thinking I was alone. I paused, letting the quiet speak. But I wasn't. I just hadn't heard your voices yet. Because sometimes it takes one voice breaking the silence to remind everyone else they can speak too. The crowd clapped, some cried. Even Mr. Grumpy from 2 streets over gave me a thumbs up. After the speech, people shared what they'd grown. Matatos from Mr. Gonzalez's heirloom seeds. Honey from the new rooftop hives at Lot 9. Eggplants from a teenager named Maya who'd never planted anything before this spring. The mayor even showed up. Cut a ribbon, took photos, promised grants for future green initiatives. But for me, the real victory was when a quiet man named Glynn walked up with a wooden box. Inside was a set of old garden tools, weathered, oiled, clearly loved. My grandfather used these on his farm before they lost the land to developers, he said softly. I never got it back. But watching what you did here, it gave me peace. Not every voice needs to be loud. It just needs to be the first. When I stood up to Patricia, I didn't know if anyone would follow. I didn't know if the system would bend or bury me. But I spoke anyway. And somehow, that one voice became many. And those voices built something stronger than any fence line. Trust. Today, Maplewood Estates doesn't just have a garden. It has a council of residents, open meetings, rotating leadership, financial transparency. HOA dues go into real improvements now. A little library, a rainwater collection system, free composting classes taught by Emma every second Saturday. And guess what? Property values went up. Turns out, buyers like living next to fresh vegetables and friendly people. Who knew? Last week, a family from a nearby town came to visit. Their HOA just declared war on backyard chickens. The father looked tired. The mother clutched a folder full of notices. The daughter asked if she could see our strawberries. "We heard what you built," the father said. "We want to fight back too, but where do we even start?" I smiled and handed him a shovel. "Right here. You start by refusing to be silent." As the sun set, fireflies danced over the fields. The same fields my grandfather tilled with bare hands and stubborn faith. And I sat on the porch, one hand resting on a fresh basket of tomatoes, watching the garden we all planted together, thinking about how close we came to losing it all, and how just one voice saved everything. Have you ever stood alone against something wrong? What did you learn? Comment below, like, share, and never underestimate your own voice.